Thanks very much for the presentation. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who have felt, indeed some of us felt from the outset, that dividing the banks into a recovery division within the bank and a good bank, if you like, that would get back to lending to business and to the economy at large was the least cost approach. And there are quite a few people, I think, who would support you in that general approach. But can I ask you just specifically about some of the things? In respect of both AIB and Bank of Ireland, you assert that their capital requirement is much greater than has been admitted. And maybe could you identify where...
I don't assert. I show that the loan losses at a write-down level of 40% will requires bigger capital than they are.
Can you perhaps, like my understanding, the way the prudential capital assessment was done by the regulator was they started with the NAMA write-down, then they did an assessment of what they regarded was needed to be done on the non-NAMA loans, and then they applied, what they regarded as a prudential buffer to take account of, perhaps rose-tinted views from within the banks, and that's how, the final, the 2.7 and the 7.4 and so
5, I think, and 7.4
reached. Yeah, can I just ask? Let me ask the question before you give the answer. Can I just ask, where do you see the flaw having occurred? Is it in the methodology applied by the regulators and central bank's office?
Allows, you see, of the interim movement of assets. And that is selling M&T, selling off the Polish bank, and they're assuming that these things can be achieved.
I thought, maybe I'm wrong, but are they not? Did the regulator not come up with the 7.6, 7.4 in respect of AIB, and then turned to AIB and say, well, what can you how are you going to realise capital of that nature? And then that was left, if you like, for the bank and the government to come up with how that was to be filled. But your contention or your demonstration is that AIB are 2.2 billion out, and what I'm trying to establish is that a fault of the Elderfield/Honohan analysis and way of reaching it.
You use the word methodology.
Yeah, methodology. Is that where that flaw has occurred, and what's wrong with it? Could I ask?
Okay, I'd like to take that point. It's well made. As regards methodology is valid based on the assumptions and the acceptability or otherwise of assumptions. It comes down to judgment. And the judgment of anybody who's been in banking for a long time and understands our economy and the type of ratios that are needed as a de facto experience, no matter what they say in Basel or what they say in Canada or what they say in France or England, we all know that if you're only going to be able to collect 60% of 24 billion, you have to write down 40%. And you might as well do the sensible thing and stick in that capital straight away and see what happens with the rest. But if you're going to fall short by 2.2 billion, you're going to be limping along, and you're not going to be able to do the 3 billion.
I don't want to be argumentative, but we thought that we had experts in banking, in Matthew Elderfield, a new person coming in, and in Patrick Honohan, a new person coming in.
Regulation.
Yeah, who did the PCA, whatever they call it, the Prudential Capital Assessment Review, and who came up with the 7.3 or 7.4 and the 2.7. I think most people on all sides of the House thought that those were pretty bedrock figures, that these were new people coming in, experts. They weren't being, taken in by the rose-tinted glasses of the existing boards or anyone else. But are you saying that they've got it wrong as well? And that
I'm saying that I have a different judgment on the matter, and my judgment so far on on where things were going to lie in terms of the necessary write-down levels, what losses would arise in certain situations, have been proved correct by the facts. And I don't want to be looking as if I've fallen short, the putt that never went into the hole. You've got to get the ball up to the hole to get it in. And I think all my experience and that of other people who would have similar length experience and who know the background and know the types of loan books these banks have. Remember, Mr. Elderfield is looking at it in laboratories type text situations. He's seeing it from the templates of the best theoretical and historical practice. This is on the ground stuff. This is like an Irish doctor recognizing a cough as maybe having a tuberculosis in it.
Can I ask you just the second question, which is, in the present model, NAMA have taken an average 47% write down on their loan, on the loans that were transferred to them. Like, what is your estimate of the, if you like, the amount of loss in actual recovery that will fall on NAMA? And secondly, what's your estimate of the amount of loss that still, if you like, has to be fall? If you like, the 2 billion shortfall in Anglo or in AIB and the whatever you were saying, the other one, where will that loss fall? Is it your view that AIB and Bank of Ireland will be coming back in at a future date seeking more capital from the state to plug?
I think we will have limp-along banks, zombie banks, because they will be trying, in the case of Bank of Ireland, the indications are that they will just about stay outside 50% control if they achieved the current plan. But that makes them a limp-along bank that thinks they have the ability to do what is needed of a major utility bank in the economy. And I think that if we grab the handlebars as a state for 5 years, we have a much better chance of that bank fulfilling the functions that need to be fulfilled for businesses and households with transparency and direct motivational control. I'm not afraid of state involvement. I worked at...
Just a final question, because I know you're very concerned. In your model of the state involvement, and when the loss, that bigger loss occurs, on whose account will it fall then? The bigger loss that you believe will materialise in your model?
It will lead to another drawing of the well. It'll be back to us for more. There'll be fudging of things. But
in your model, do any of the bond holders...
You get in straight away. You do it all in 4 weeks. The Americans, by the way, on TARP 2, did it in a fortnight. TARP 1 was their NAMA, and rightly, they relieved the congressmen of the whip on the party
sides. In your view...
And they said, no, TARP 1 and NAMA is not the way to go because it leads to exactly the problems that we've had. And TARP 2 was the direct capital injection, and it worked. They're way ahead of us.
In your view, as various senior bonds mature within those banks, what's your view as to what happens in a state 95 controlled bank to those senior bondholders as they reach maturity and would otherwise, come up for being paid back at par?
There's no problem in the three viable banks and building society. There's no problem. Those bonds can be refinanced and rolled over in the normal course of business. It's just a matter of the shareholder is now the state temporarily until we cash out of that investment in 5 years' time on rehabilitated banks that have normal operating profits of 4.5 to 5 billion. An easy, non-demanding, achievable target. That's an easy thing. Don't worry about the bonds in those two. The only bonds that you might have to worry about are in Anglo and Nationwide. And the bondholders there take the consequences of their investment.